Yate, Sha'e Dasanawad Arrow Yenashe, Quapa Nishle, Twitchitni Bashishtin, Quapa Osage Dashache, Ashihe Dashanella. Hello everyone, my name is Dasanawad Arrow. I am Dene, Quapa, and Osage. I'm originally from the Navajo Nation, and I currently reside in Tucson, Arizona on the traditional lands of the Pasquayaqui, Tana'atam, Atam Druid, Hohokam, and Sobai Cree people. I am absolutely thrilled to be here with all of you today to introduce our special guest, Kyron Potts. Kai is a two-spirit. Oh, I'm supposed to advance. Sorry, everyone. That's me. One more. Kai is a two-spirit content creator and youth advocate, and I've had the pleasure to get to know through laughter and truth-telling. We're not from the same area, we're not from the same backgrounds, but oral tradition and storytelling is part of our culture, it's part of who we are, and I would say it's core to Indigenous people. So I'm honored to welcome you to the stage today to share truth with us, to share your story and knowledge. Without further ado, Kai.
Hello everybody, oh my gosh, I'm so honored to be here. First of all, Tanse ka kiao, nitotamak, nawagamaganak, Tanse. Okisiku kanami tut nimiowin, amiskuchu askai kanotinia, aboashtano, Karen Potts Magepchat, Alexis Nakota Sioux Nation Chadecha Hemochat. I introduced myself in both of my languages, both Stoney Nakota and also in Cree, because I think that it's really important for, first of all, I don't think I've heard anybody speak Stoney in these lands. I'm a guest in these lands and I'm really honored to be here. So it's always really important for us to speak about who we are in our own tongues, because a lot of our languages are sleeping and this helps to kind of wake those languages up a little bit. So thank you so much for having me. I'm so honored to be here, and big shout out to Intuit and also to Dessa for all of the work that they're doing and making sure that voices like mine are held with such grace and such space in these institutions. So I'm really happy to be here to have a conversation with you about two-spirit identity. Now, when I introduce myself to people, I like to say, hello, I am a two-spirit person. I'm also winkte. And this word that I'm explaining to you is a word in my language, in the Stoney Nakoda language, and in Lakota languages all around Turtle Island, is a language that I use to describe myself first and foremost before I describe myself as a two-spirit person. And I'll get into what two-spirit is a little bit later, but this word winkte, I remember my auntie Donna Potts, sitting down with me and telling me when I was 4 years old. Well, she didn't tell me, she was telling my brothers who were picking on me. She said, leave him alone, he's two-spirit. Because I would often get teased for doing things like wearing makeup, for wearing skirts, for having a little bit too much fun playing with my mom's hair, listening to Shania Twain, doing all this Mariah Carey, and having a lot of fun just being really feminine and being myself. And when I was born, I was always this person. At not one point in my entire life was I ever not this person. And I was told that I was a gift from the Creator. And I didn't understand what that was until a lot later in my life. And my Auntie Donna, I remember her telling me, you're a two-spirit person. You're a two-spirit person, and I kept hearing this word, two-spirit. And initially, it really upset me. I was a little bit scared of it, in fact. I thought, two-spirit, that sounds different. And growing up around so much toxic masculinity, different meant negative. Different meant bad. Different meant I didn't fit in, I didn't belong. So I initially didn't want to identify with this word two-spirit. It wasn't until I was about 17 years old that I was having my big, first love, first heartbreak coming out situation in my life. And one of my cousins, who is a really traditional man in my family, who helped me to become an oskapio, or in our language, somebody who's a helper in ceremony. I grew up quite traditional, practicing ceremony every single week and really heavily involved. And one of my mentors, who was kind of like a father to me, Lonnie, who was my cousin, I remember sitting with him in a truck in a parking lot, telling him that I was so sad and heartbroken because the person that I was in a relationship with and I broke up. And I kept specifically not mentioning any genders, because I was trying to kind of gauge his reaction, you know. And eventually I said, I'm really sad because I was in a relationship with another boy, and I think that means that I'm gay. And he said, no, you're not gay, you're two-spirit. And so I thought, oh, here's this word again, two-spirit. So eventually I looked into it a little bit more, and I remember the first elder, who was a two-spirit elder, who talked to me. She said, you're a two-spirit, so buckle up, it's not going to be easy. And I thought, all right. And boy, was she right. It's been a bit of a journey, but it's been one that has been so eye-opening and so beautiful and powerful and filled with a lot of love and filled with a lot of community. And this word winkte, I remember my auntie telling me, it derives from the word wia in our language, which means woman. And so winkte or wiankte is somebody who moves through the world like a woman would, who is not a woman. And it's a very loose translation. English fails so many times to try to explain the complex nuances of really beautiful, ancient, spiritual, traditional identities. You know, gender variance, sexual variance has existed in Turtle Island, or what we know as North America, since before the English language existed. And I didn't learn about that until I was much older. And so I've dedicated my last, 10 to 15 years of my life really trying to figure out what that was. And so I get asked this question, what is two-spirit? I get asked this question a million times a day. And my answer changes every once in a while, but the main points that I like to give to people is that two-spirit is first and foremost an English word. It didn't really belong to us. I mean, that's why it was so important for me to explain that I'm a winkte person, because that is who I am. I'm a winkte person who identifies as two-spirit, as a kind of like a placeholder kind of courtesy to people who don't speak my language, to help them better understand who I am and all of the complex spiritual, traditional roles and responsibilities that come with that. So what is two-spirit? Two-spirit is an umbrella term. It's a colonial term that exists that many different nations around Turtle Island or North America use as a way to describe and to group and organize their queer and gender diverse people. In 1990, a group of elders and leaders in our community who were gay and lesbian, because we didn't have the word two-spirit at that time, met up at the 3rd annual Gay and Lesbian Conference in Toronto, and they went into ceremony for 4 days. And I remember Dr. Myra Laramie, who's an incredible Ojibwe and Cree elder where we come from, went into ceremony with all of these leaders. And for 4 days, they tried to discover what is a word that we can use? What is a term that we can use to describe all of us? A term that's going to be able to try to invite others into this conversation about gender diversity, about sexual diversity. And two-spirit was the word that came to her. And she's very adamant about telling people that she did not coin this term, two-spirit. In fact, she went into ceremony and it was given to her by Creator, by Waka, by Manitou, as a way to represent all of us. And it derives from the Ojibwe word, Nij Manitowak, which is two-spirit or two-souled person. Similar to Cree, where we have the word ayakweo, I think it's such a beautiful term because ayakweo is like literally neither man nor woman, just kind of both at the same time somehow, and existing through the world as a spirit, as somebody who is of spirit. And so you'll hear me when I identify myself as two-spirit, I often don't say two-spirited, because I truly believe language is really powerful. And if I'm going to describe myself as a person, I'm not, like, what is spirited? How can someone even be spirited? What does spirited mean anyway, right? So two-spirit person, first and foremost, always is how I identify myself. But I would so love in the future to be able to come up here and say I'm winkte, first and foremost, and have people kind of understand what that is and know what that is prior to me saying it. When I was younger, I heard this story, which I'm going to share with you. And I think it's a really powerful story and really exemplifies two-spirit identity in North America. It was given to me by Paulette Patra, who's an incredible advocate and is the executive director of Two Spirits in Motion Society in Edmonton, or in Canada. And I've offered tobacco, pejuta, medicine for this story. So I have permission now to share this story with who I choose. I just ask that if you recall this story, you mention me, you mention Paulette, you mention Lonnie when you're giving this story. So it starts with Waka, or in my language, the Great Spirit, Wakantanka, Creator, God, however you would describe this person. And there were many, many animals who were also beautiful and all had these incredible furs. And people would trade furs as a currency. And so people like the fox and the wolf had these incredibly beautiful furs that were used for all different types of things. And Tatanka, the buffalo, had this fur that would always be dusty, always be dirty, and no one wanted these furs. So of course, Tatanka's like, hey, what the heck? Every time he has to walk somewhere, he has to go and pull this fur, and it drags on the ground and gets all dusty and worn out. And he goes to Waka and says, hey, Waka, how come my fur is not as beautiful as the rest of them? I want to make sure that my fur can be shared and that my fur is a gift and it's beautiful. So Waka said, all right, I'll give you a gift. And he gifted this hump to Tatanka and said, now look, you can put your fur on this big hump. And the lining, the space between the hump and the fur is the gift that he gave him. So now, when Tatanka walks around, his fur is so gorgeous and immaculate because he doesn't have to drag it on the ground anymore. And he said, oh, thank you so much, Ishnish, hi, thank you, Waka. But I have a question. What is the name of this gift that you've given me? And Waka says, the gift that I've given you is Winkte. It's called Winkte. And the reason that it's so important is because it exists in this in-between area and makes things beautiful. It makes things right. And consistently in Indigenous languages that I've gotten to learn and from elders that I've gotten a chance to meet with, that's the same concept of being a two-souled person, being somebody who goes in between. And that could not have been more true in my life. I always feel like when I go into spaces, when I meet people, I'm constantly people are upset that they can't put me into a category. They can't put me into a box. Not quite a man, not really a girl, don't know really who this person is. Constantly challenging and holding people accountable to their own preconceived notions of what gender is. And just kind of like saying F you to the gender binary. Always, in every space that I go into. And I've learned that that is not something that's bad about me. I am not a troublemaker. Maybe I am a troublemaker. I'm not that much of a troublemaker. Instead, it's kind of like a superpower. It's like this medicine, this magic that I've been given when I go into those spaces to kind of flip them around. And I love this term that I'm trying out for myself, this identity that I'm trying called in-betweener. Because I truly feel like I exist in that gray area, that in-between space, between two souls, between two spirits. So as a two-spirit person, I carry both masculine and feminine spirits within myself, and they exist in so many different ways all the time. I find that when I'm hanging out with my younger siblings, I have a specific role in my community. In the Lakota language, in the Lakota community, in our ceremonies, we have the elders, we have the song people, we have the Winkte person, we have the contrary, and we have the skeptic. Our ceremonies don't start until these people are present. So because I'm a two-spirit person, I was told I am more spiritually attuned, I'm more spiritually aligned. And so my prayers and all of the energy and the medicine that I give goes to the Creator quicker. It's kind of like dial-up internet versus like fiber optic, kind of, you know? And that's one sort of medicine that I have that I carry. So I really, really try to do that in my day-to-day life. I take it so seriously that being two-spirit is not synonymous with being a gay Native person. There are many gay Native people who are not two-spirit. In fact, I have a partner who I've been with for 11 years. He's a man, he is cisgendered, he is a gay man who's very Indigenous, and he doesn't identify as two-spirit, or at least he didn't for majority of our relationship, despite being with somebody who's just beating the two-spirit drum constantly and doing all this education, you would think he would also identify that way, but he doesn't. And that's his prerogative, and that's his right to not identify that way. And I really want to impart onto the importance of not assuming that every Indigenous person that you run into is gonna be two-spirit, or even knows what that is. As we know, colonization has really hurt and damaged many communities, many Indigenous communities in Turtle Island. And with the introduction of colonial religion, with a colonial gender binary, with the introduction of the Indian residential school system, the Indian Act, the reservation system, so many different mechanisms in Turtle Island, specifically in Canada, because I can only speak to my experiences as an Indigenous person where I'm from. These mechanisms have really resulted in the destruction of many two-spirit knowledge keepers, many two-spirit stories. And as Dessa mentioned earlier, Indigenous people are such oral storytellers. They bring with them such a power of, giving all of the information in the language, but also being able to actively listen and absorb that information. So our two-spirit knowledge keepers have had to either go underground and hide and really stifle who they are in order to survive this colonization. And if they didn't, a lot of them are just straight up killed. And when you're killing knowledge keepers, you're killing information. You're killing the possibility for that information to go on further. And that is the reality of where we are right now with our culture. But there's such a resurgence of that happening, of revitalization. And I always love using the word two-spirit resurgence because I truly feel that that's what it is. It's this surge of young people coming in and figuring out who they are, learning the words, learning the languages, connecting with the elders. And so now you're seeing so many more people identify as two-spirit. We're hearing this term a lot more. And it's important to note that this term is nothing new. This term isn't something that was just created. A little while ago, Piers Morgan was on national television saying two-spirit is made up, which felt like a personal attack against Indigenous people. And it really hurt me because I want you to know two-spirit, winkte, ayakwe, nishmaradawag, all of these terms existed since time immemorial. And my queerness is traditional. My existence is a resistance. And two-spirit people have such strict and beautiful roles and responsibilities in the community. So me identifying to you that I'm a two-spirit person is me accepting that I have a job to play. I have a role to play. And I think it's really exciting and really fun that all of us are here together talking about this because we are all participating in that resurgence, in that reconciliation. We together are kind of like the start of something new. And me being here talking to you is a real life example in contemporary society of me fulfilling my role as a two-spirit person. And that is so, so important and so beautiful. So I thank all of you for being here to talk about that with me because wow, is it ever beautiful. And to hear myself speaking Stoney in these lands is truly a gift and really a great opportunity. When I mentioned earlier that two-spirit people were kind of like this in-between kind of people, a really great story came to mind about how I think two-spirit people are like water. Because water is really gentle. It's super gentle. But then we have things like tsunamis. And then we have things like a simple drip slowly eroding rock and cutting through mountains. And we think that, wow, water is healing, water is beautiful, water is gentle, but water is fierce. Water is powerful. And when you think about a crack in a foundation, two-spirit people are like water in the sense that they can kind of go into that space and water settles in no matter what kind of physical form these cracks are in. It just settles right in there, finds a way. Like ivy, we are growing where there's no room for us sometimes. So water coming into that area and settling there heals it and makes that space safe again. That's how I feel two-spirit people are. And that's how I feel my connection to who I am in every space that I'm in is that role, that responsibility of being an educator, of being a mediator. Lakota people, Sioux people had stories about winkte or two-spirit people who were scouts, who ahead of the party, the war party, would go up 4 days ahead, and they would be in ceremony, and they would fast, and they would have visions about the battle that was to come. And they would use that information that they gathered, bring it back to their people, and say, hey, I'm giving you advice on how we can advance with our people, how we can stay safe. We're going to attack these people. We're going to retreat. This is what I see happening. And that power, that knowledge, that foresight was incredibly valuable. And so these two-spirit people were held in such high regard, celebrated even. And that's why I always tell young people, it's not enough for people to tolerate you. Be in spaces where people celebrate you. And in our culture, in our communities, we have always been celebrated. You are a gift to our world, and you should be treated as such. So, because I was saying that two-spirit people have this masculine and feminine spirit, sometimes that can look like different things. Not every two-spirit person is going to be wearing a ribbon skirt, a beautiful ribbon skirt, or really beautiful makeup, you know? They're going to look like somebody who's just a straight, you know, passing person, and that's okay. My spirit and my energy, it can be quite nurturing, quite gentle, quite soft, and feminine in many ways. When I'm dealing with people, or when I'm talking with young people, or talking with people who may have been victims of domestic abuse, I always make sure I'm sitting next to them, I'm speaking softly, and I'm not trying to take up space as a really hyper-masculine person, because I understand the use of energy and the use of spirit like that in a way that can sometimes unintentionally be a little bit triggering for people. And so that's one cool example of ways in which two-spirit people in our communities can really sort of meet whatever situation they're in with the best version of themselves to be in that situation and to help. And one question I get asked a lot is, how can people be allies? What can we do to learn more about two-spirit people, to make sure that our two-spirit people are being protected, are being brought back into our circles, and are doing it on their own terms? Because that's a really important thing too, is we need to give the power back to Indigenous people to be telling their own stories, to be telling their own narratives, to be protecting their own people, just like they've always done. Colonization affects so many different people, but it happens today even still. Colonization was not some, you know, act that happened, some singular event that happened that was way in the past. Colonization is a structure, and it's a system that we live in every single day. So as an ally, as somebody who's interested in really supporting two-spirit people and Indigenous queer people, figuring out ways in which you can exist in a colonial system while also still really supporting these original peoples and storytellers and caretakers of both land and community. I think one of the greatest ways is educating yourself, and I'm really glad all of you are here and all of you are tuned in listening, because that's already one great thing that you're doing that's really showing a lot of allyship. I think allies are so important in our communities and have just as important a space in our communities as well, because we don't do everything by ourselves. We are community people. We do things together. There is an incredible organization in Canada that I know of that's called the Two Spirits in Motion Society, Two Spirits in Motion Society. And they do national work, and I think they're the only national two-spirit organization that I can think of. And they do not only cultural work to support with educating people about our histories and all of the knowledge and teachings that come with being a two-spirit person, but they also do a lot of traditional counseling for our people and assist with mental health. They're creating safe cultural spaces. Every single year they hold an international gathering to make sure that all two-spirit people can come to this gathering. They sponsor people with flights and accommodation to make sure that there's no barriers to them accessing these spaces, because it's so important. Just because we connect online doesn't mean we're feeling the same spirit of being here in person, you know? So making sure that they can get two-spirit people to their events is something that they do, which is incredible. They're also working on language revitalization. They have a youth council, which has created a website where people can share their stories of being a two-spirit person. They also have a podcast where young people go in and interview elders and community members who have a lot of teachings. And just to see the interaction between young people and elders talking about about traditional queerness is just really beautiful and really helpful to a lot of those people. So I urge anybody who's interested and who's listening, who wants to help out, that things like monetary donations go a really long way if you feel like that's the only way that you can help. It's so important making sure that there's capacity for capacity building to make sure that people are hired and that people are paid good, fair wages to continue this work of cultural, spiritual work. A lot of people don't necessarily hold that in the same regard as somebody who maybe, has Western knowledge or education, carrying a master's degree, and then they hire somebody who has so much cultural, traditional knowledge, and they're not seen as equals. And we really need to address that. And so if there is any way that you can help, making sure that you go in, and even if you have the opportunity to offer space. I know that a lot of Two-Spirit gatherings are really hard to do because we need spaces that can be culturally safe as well, where we can practice our traditions, practice our sacred cultural practices like smudging, for example. That's really important as well. And a lot of these facilities can't accommodate that. So finding really good facilities for us to continue to have these meetings and to spread this education is really, really, really important. So I urge you, if you have the capacity to do that, that's really important. And also just spreading the word, making sure that when you go to some of these organizations that you're actively listening, you're going there with good intentions, and you're seeing who's in your backyard that you could talk to and say, you know what, actually, I think there's a kid in my class who might be Two-Spirit. Or, hey, I have a best friend who has a nephew who I think could be Two-Spirit. I'm going to connect them with this, or I'm going to reach out to them and see if there's anything I can do. I really do think one small little action can really affect so much change. And we always have to start in our own backyards, truly. Everyone always thinks we should be doing all these big overhead things. The way we get to those big overhead changes is that we all make a call to action to ourselves. And to promise ourselves that every day when we see an opportunity to really be kind to a Two-Spirit person, to go up and meet them, to understand who they are, and to lead with love, that truly is how we're going to start making those systemic changes. There's the Edmonton Two-Spirit Society, which I was an education director for many years, who's an incredible organization. Edmonton Two-Spirit Society, E2S. And then there's also the Two-Spirited People of the First Nations, which is the largest nonprofit in the GTA area that assists with just incredible frontline work for our Two-Spirit people. They host powwows that are Two-Spirit inclusive, so you get to see all the Two-Spirit people dancing whatever gender dance they want to dance. Dressing up and feeling really safe in those spaces is super, super important. So if you have the opportunity to support them, I think they're an incredible organization. They most recently started a pilot where it's an alternative to police services, where they are frontline responders to crises. So they have a crisis line that people call in, hey, we're having an issue, and a team of Two-Spirit people respond to these crises and lead them to whatever services they may need. And it's intervention without police intervention, because as we know, police intervention can sometimes be a little violent and not safe for most people. So supporting them would be absolutely incredible. And yeah, we're getting kind of near the end, so I want to wrap it up, but I just want to, again, reiterate how important it is to have Two-Spirit representation from actual Two-Spirit people coming up here, talking about lived experience, and really sharing this space in a good way. And that's what we've done. And Dessa and the team at Intuit have really done an absolutely incredible job of making sure that Two-Spirit voices are not only valued, but are championed and are supported. And I felt nothing but support and love here. I've learned so much. And so I want to thank all of you and give yourselves a round of applause. I think you've done an incredible job at this Trans Summit. And I can't wait for Two-Spirit knowledge and Two-Spirit traditions to start resurging in areas that, are new to a lot of us. So thank you so much.